You can't count that high. It's not fair. That wasn't in the manual. All right. Hey,
they're going to wonder what we're doing when you press record.
It's okay. They can wonder. It's part of the allure, the mystique, the ambiance. All right. So welcome back. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So without further ado, we get to introduce you to the one, the only, the phenom writer, Mr. Daniel Schwabauer. And did I get it anywhere close to right this time?
You did it perfectly. It was great, JR.
Thank you. I'm going to put that in my calendar. Cisca, remember, I was perfect.
Last time.
I was perfect. Just write that down.
Yeah.
All right.
Don't let it go to your head. I mean, we're just at the beginning of the interview, so.
So the second part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we first met them. So I shall go first because I know what Cisca's answer is going to be. And so I found Daniel through the Storybundle. I found out we were both going to be in the same one together. So I decided to arrange a few interviews. And he seems like a lot of fun. So far in the pre-show, he's been making fun of me with Cisca. So we know he's a keeper. If people are nice to me, I start thinking they're plotting on me.
It's JR, as much as I love you, it's low-hanging fruit and an easy target. That means it's great.
So how did you find him? Well, next you're going to tell me, like, you were plotting against me when I wasn't here. And
I clicked, you said, click on this link. I clicked on this link, and lo and behold, there was a StreamYard.
All right. So now you get to ask him the important question, the religion question, and we get to see if he gets to stick around.
Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Star Wars all the way. I mean, Firefly's fun, but short. And Star Wars is really like the childhood thing. I remember watching it when it came out, in theaters. My dad took me to it, and
Aww.
I saw it over and over again that summer. And so it wasn't the first thing that pulled me into science fiction, but it was kind of the year after I got pulled in, and I just more emotional connection to it,
I can understand that. Now, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, or Harry Potter?
Lord of the Rings. But that's a hard question to answer because I don't return to Lord of the Rings as much as I do Harry Potter, simply because I think Jim Dale's audiobooks are fantastic. I mean, so when I go on road trips, I will sometimes re-listen to the Harry Potter books, but Lord of the Rings to me is just, I mean, it's groundbreaking, it's brilliant. There's a lot to like about it, but I don't go back and reread it frequently.
It is foundational.
Yeah.
So now, since you mentioned your love, which one was your first love, science fiction or fantasy?
Science fiction. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And what's your earliest memory of science fiction?
Well, when I was between 5th and 6th grade, I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma in a KOA in a camper. And it was because my dad was he was a project manager, he was an architect, and he built, I don't know if you're familiar with Kansas City, he built Crown Center in Kansas City.
Oh, wow.
And he was asked to build the Williams Center in Tulsa. And so, I knew nothing about any of this. I was, just leaving 5th grade. And he said, well, I don't want to be down there the whole time without my family. So he got this little enclosed camper. And right before we left, I visited some friends and was in their basement library. And I found Edgar Rice Burroughs' A Princess of Mars.
Oh, wow.
And I was like pulled into this not really great story, but wonderful story at the same time. I'd never experienced science fiction before, and they noticed how much I liked it, and they basically sent me with a grocery bag full of books by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And so we landed, I call it my summer in Mars, because we landed at this KOA, which was like, red dust. It was it was like 110 degrees the whole summer, and I had my own little
ambiance.
Yeah, it was. We even had a little like hard shell habitat with a little like circular window looking out over canals, and I'm not kidding. So I mean, I sat in the air conditioning of this place for 3 months, and went through Barsoom and Pellucidar, and I mean all of the. I think Edgar Rice Burroughs only wrote one novel, but he just he changed the names of different things in it, but I loved it. And so science fiction was the thing that really pulled me into sci-fi. And this may be too long of a story, but I happened to go into 6th grade. I lucked into one of the best teachers in the universe. She was one of the first, I think she was the first African-American teacher in Johnson County, Kansas.
Oh, wow.
And everybody in the school, all the kids fell in love with her. But what she did was she noticed your tendencies, and she noticed that I was reading geeky novels. I was reading Day of the Giants by Lester Del Rey. That year was when I first read, in 6th grade, I read Lord of the Rings for the first time and the Chronicles of Narnia. And she asked me to teach her to play chess. And she said she'd always wanted to learn. And because I would rather read than go outside and play on the swings, we played chess. And she read the books that I was reading and talked to me about it all year long, instead of like grading papers and stuff. I think she was a saint, honestly. But she made me believe I could be a writer. And the fact that an adult took science fiction seriously and wanted to talk to me about it. And I mean, I was just a dumb kid. I was in 6th grade. I didn't know. I just wanted to go to different worlds. And those books really let me do that. So that's my long answer. That's what pulled me into science fiction.
So what is it about that's the speculative fiction that you love specifically? Is there any one aspect to it that you love the most?
Well, what I love about science fiction in particular, I mean, I love fantasy too, but it's not on the same level for me. And in part because I think for me, fantasy feels often more derivative, and that's not necessarily bad. And it's also probably because I don't read it as much, and maybe I've picked the wrong things. But I like the exploration of ideas through story immersion. Really great science fiction to me will help you to kind of walk through an idea that you can't get in reality, but that can introduce you to the possibility. Like, it expands your view of what can be. It helps you to think differently, and kind of broaden your imagination, I guess. So I love that. I love stories that do that in particular, and are not just, there's nothing wrong with escapist fiction. I like escapist fiction too, but to me, the highest level of thing is where someone makes me see reality differently. When I go, I've only been looking at it from the West, and they've picked me up and dropped me on the other side of it, and I'm looking at it from the East now, and it looks a little different over here. I really love it when someone can do that for me. So science fiction does it really well, and fantasy does sometimes.
That's a good answer. So how did your love of speculative fiction translate into you writing stories in this wild world of imagination?
Well, in part because of Miss Henry in the 6th grade, who made me think I could be a writer, I kept writing through, junior high and high school, and I kept reading stuff. And I got to a point where I was like, the only thing I want to do is write. And I don't know where to go to learn to do this, but I guess you go to college. So I went to college. I got a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Kansas. And I stumbled upon a class my first year there by Jim Gunn, because he taught at KU, started the Center for the Study of Science Fiction at Kansas University, which nobody knew about at the time. And what I noticed was that he's taught story very differently than anybody else. When I was in college studying creative writing, what we learned was word photography. We learned how to make things sound sort of pretty and interesting, but we never talked about character arcs or story structure. We never talked about any of that stuff. But Jim Gunn did. And unfortunately, everybody else, what my perspective was as a student, that all the other people kind of looked down on science fiction. I had another professor tell me, she told the whole class, you can write about anything you want as long as it's not that science fiction and fantasy crap. And I was like, but that's what I want to write. So
I don't like her.
She was a good teacher. They had a bias. And it took me a while, when I actually getting out of college, to realize that I had absorbed some of the literary pretentiousness of of my education, and I'd missed out on a lot. And I had to accept the reality that I had not gotten from college what I thought I was going to get. And then I actually graduated with a master's degree in creative writing and could not define for you what a story was. And that was a really weird wake-up call to me. I was like, I need a different kind of education here. So that's kind of another long story in answer to your question. But Jim Gunn, and he passed away just a few months ago, really kept feeding me my interest in story, and he didn't ever tell me what to do really, but he kind of made me think in ways that I think have helped me as a writer. And so I owe a lot to him too, honestly. And I got to thank him at the 2017 Worldcon. He showed up the last day, and I don't know what he was, 95 at the time or something. And I got to say, hey, I didn't express this enough back in the early 90s, but thank you, So I would say it was Jim Gunn's influence that kind of shoveled me that direction. And then I kept writing it. In 1997. I sold my first short story to Tailbones magazine, and that was my launch into the genre, I guess.
Nice. So many authors let their real life experiences influence the stories they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments for you?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we have enough time for this. Can I tell
you
you two stories? Okay. One, when I sold that short story, it was called Ulla. It got a few recommendations for a Nebula Award, and the Nebulas that year were in Kansas City. And so I didn't have any money, but it's like, it's here. I need to go to this. And I really wanted to connect with a famous writer and like kind of just connect around this idea for a novel that I had. So I went to the Nebulas, and I was waiting for the big awards thing to start. And I went to one of the rooms where everybody's, having a party. There were probably 30 or 40 people in the room, and the guy was there and nobody's talking to him. And I'm pretty introverted. I don't normally just go up, and I'm happy hanging out in the corner by myself. But I walked up to famous author and I said, "Hey, famous author, I'm Dan Schwabauer. It's nice to meet you. I just want to tell you, I really loved your novel X." I'm not going to say his name because I think he was drunk, but he looked at me, looked at my hand, and he went, "Pfft," and he turned around and walked away. And it coincided with everybody getting really quiet. And so I looked around, I've got my hand sticking out, and everybody's looking at me like, "Oh, wow." That's kind of painful. And so I go, "Okay, I'm getting out of here." I walked out of the room. I went down to the bar. I sat down, and the guy next to me said, "So are you one of these writers?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I thought I was till about 10 minutes ago." And he said, "Well, hey, my name's Kevin Anderson. Nice to meet you." And Kevin Anderson spent the next hour talking to me about writing. And it was a memorable moment because he said, and I've talked to him since, and he doesn't remember this, but I remember it vividly because he said, "Dan, this isn't true, but this is what he said." He said, "You're a better writer than I am. And I can tell you that because everybody's a better writer than I am. I'm just more persistent than everybody else." He said, I think it's okay. I've heard him tell this story this part of it publicly, that he had over 700 rejection letters before he sold his first story to a magazine that paid in copies. I think I'm telling that story correctly. But just the humility and the willingness to talk to somebody that couldn't do anything for him made me think, okay, so not everybody in this business is a jerk. This guy was really helpful. The other thing that was maybe more specific towards military sci-fi is I had an uncle who was a veteran of the Vietnam War, and Uncle Raj. And Roger was a great guy. He just had this, to me, kind of odd aversion to guns. And so as a kid, when we would play like Army or squirt guns or something, he would not let my cousins have guns. And I just didn't understand. I was like, what's up with Uncle Raj? I didn't get it. When my grandmother died, and Roger had already passed away. My grandmother died. My dad, who's the oldest son, was the executor of my grandparents' estate. He got the will, found out there was a safe deposit box, got the safe deposit box. I come home from college and my dad has the safe deposit box open and he says, Dan, you need to come here and look at this. And it is a series of letters from my uncle he had joined the Marine Corps because he thought he was going to be drafted. And they told him apparently that if he if he willingly signed up before the draft, that he'd kind of choose some assignments. He was a great trombone player and he thought he was going to be in the Marine band, and they made him a forward observer in Vietnam. So my uncle, instead of letting my grandmother know what was going on, he wrote letters to her about the great time he was having in Hawaii. And then he shipped them to a friend in Hawaii. And so they would have the postal stamp marked Hawaii going back to my grandmother. So those letters were in the safe deposit box, along with a magazine that had a story about the combat going on in Vietnam and a picture of my uncle in combat. And along with that was a silver star and the citation for the silver star, what he had done. So completely changed my perspective on Uncle Roger being a little weird, and it was such an interesting story of the man behind the mask in a way. Not that he intentionally wore masks, but just there's so much more there that made me think this is probably true a million times over. There's another story behind that if I could get at that and tell stories like that would help people to see things a little bit differently, maybe it would be worth doing it as science fiction.
Yeah, that's the one thing that irks me when you read military fiction is when they have them go these places and do these things, and it's fun to read about, but then there's no consequences for it. Like it doesn't affect them. Yeah. That's where they lose me, because quite frankly, if you can kill people and not feel something, you're a sociopath.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things, there are some universes I stopped reading because it was just like, no. So it's an interesting story. We appreciate your sharing it.
Yeah, it's a super powerful story. It's hard to really go on past that. So
I should have saved that one for last, I guess.
No,
you're fine. You're fine.
No, you're fine. That is really an awesome story. And I think he really loved both his country and his family. But transitioning from that into some fandom stuff, have you had any cool fan art or cosplay done of your stuff?
Well, the books that got the most traction, like initially when I wrote, were fantasy. They're anthropomorphic fantasy. They're mid-grade novels, and they were carried pretty widely by school libraries. So I have had some really fun situations where the main character of the Legends of Tyranor is this mouse named Jared. And so I've had kids dress up as Jared. I've had them, like make like replicas out of clay or knit replica Jareds with the characteristics, the way I described Jared. I've had students come up to me and recite Tamira's prophecy out of the beginning of the books. Each one of them has a poem type thing, and they'll have that memorized, and they'll just come up to me, and I'm like, I'll turn around and there's an 8-year-old, and he's recite back the poem to me. That part's kind of cool. So maybe not in the science fiction realm, but I do like kids, so that's a different kind of kick, I guess.
You're muted.
Sorry, that was awesome and so cool. But have you had anyone ask for your autograph out in public, away from a book signing or convention?
Not very often, but I did. I have had it a few times. One of them, I was standing in line at a wedding, waiting to get some food, and someone came up to me. I have no idea who it was, and they said, "Are you Dan Schwabauer? Did you write Grunt the Brave?" And I said, "Yes." Will you sign my book? Sure.
And they had it there?
Yeah. It was very unexpected. I think I had it in the car or something, and they ended up going back and getting
it. So what is your weirdest or funniest story about a fan interaction?
Keeping in mind, this is a family-friendly show, mostly.
We do try.
Mostly family. Family friendly. Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is super weird. I had a teacher, I think it was a 5th grade teacher, when Run the Brave came out. She emailed me and or through the publisher and said, hey, is there any chance you could respond to this kid who really likes your book, and he's doing his like book report on you as the author. It's the end of the year report, and it's his birthday. He's so excited that we're doing this little birthday party for him in class, and he wants to do it about your book. So they want to theme it around this book. And they said, could you send him an email? And I said, sure, but I noticed it came from what looked like a local place. And when I responded, I said, where is your school located? And she said, well, it's Gardner, Kansas, which is 15 minutes from my house. And we happened to be going that direction anyway on that particular day. So I said, what if I just stopped by? And she was like, you're kidding. Like, you live like right here in Kansas City. So I walked into the classroom, and I mean, I've done a bunch of like teaching things. I've been in classrooms. I've been asked to speak to students before, but this one was so unique because it was really for one student, but the look on his face, and not just his face, but I don't think I've ever seen a classroom where all the other kids were excited for one student.
That's awesome.
Everybody was happy for him. Like, his joy just kind of spilled out onto everybody. And my wife was actually with me, and we walked out of the school, and she said something along the lines of, now I know why you've been writing all these years. that was cool. And I was like, yeah, I didn't know that was going to happen, but it's worth it. Like all the hours of typing, kind of, I think it's worth it for that. Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
It is. So this is the part of the interview where you get to tell us the highlights reel of everything you've written. So can you tell us what you've put out into the ethos?
Well, I like to say I've been a jack of all trades, and I think the original saying was jack of all trades and master of one. I don't know if I call myself a master of the novel. That's really the thing that I'm most excited about and that I have done the most. Other than the Legends of Tyranor, I've written, I did some journalism for a newspaper for 2.5 years. I did ghostwriting for a best-selling author. I did radio scripts. I've done for a PBS animated series. I did some scripting for like telescripting. I've done radio, just anything that would pay me a buck. I wanted to provide for my family. So actually, I spent a while rewriting government brochures to make them more interesting. And I don't know if it compares with serving in the military, but if you want to find something that will make you hate bureaucracy, I suggest reading and rewriting government brochures. It's a challenge to make them interesting.
I believe
and nobody wants to read any of them that I rewrote, but yeah, that's the thing. And then of course the book that's coming out, it already came out in March, but that's going to be in the Storybundle, is an adult military sci-fi called Operation Grendel.
So that's what we brought you on to talk about today. So what is the premise for this universe? How'd you come up with the idea? Was it psychedelics, a Ouija board, overindulging in bad Kansas barbecue?
There is no such thing as bad Kansas barbecue, but that's a great question. Actually, that's not true. There is some bad barbecue here. There's a lot of great barbecue. So sometimes I think really great ideas are like a Venn diagram of two different things. In 2014 to 2017, I really spent 3 years studying the era of yellow journalism. I was producing a program for high school students called Byline that it really teaches journalism, but it does so by taking them into the past and having them kind of role play as 1930s era cub reporters. And so it meant that I did a ton of reading of journalism from about 1870 to 1923. And in doing that, I was so struck by the similarities of what happened to American newspapers and what I think I'm seeing with current journalism. I could be wrong about it, but it struck me as maybe these things move in cycles. And it really opened up a kind of fascination with propaganda and with psychological warfare and with self-deception. And I don't claim to be an expert on any of these things. It's just that 3 years of looking at what was done and the development. I'm not an expert in this, but as I understand it, propaganda, modern propaganda, developed during World War I, the World War I time period. And in America, it was the Committee for Public Information, which was a government, it's a sort of a ministry of propaganda. And the guy who ran it was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. His name is Edward Bernays. And fortunately, our government, when World War I ended, said this is we have a little too much power to have this, so they disbanded the Committee for Public Information. But all the guys that had been trained went looking for jobs, and what happened was corporations said, "Hey, come work for us," and that was the advent of modern commercial propaganda. So that's the first thing, was just that fascination with that. And then the second thing was I started going down a weird rabbit hole of quantum computing and artificial intelligence. And I was listening to podcasts of things that I would say are very much in that crossing the line into slightly kooky, but are interesting story fodder, things that are, well, like I didn't really know much about quantum computing until I started looking into this. And I had the idea, what if we wired these really powerful computers, we can condense them enough to where we can just hardwire them to people's brains. And what would they do? And so I started watching Elon Musk and some of the things he was saying about artificial intelligence and how it's going to take over and do everything better than we can do in the next 35 to 50 years. And in thinking about that, I thought, okay, well, how is that going to make propaganda and psychological warfare even creepier than it already is? So that was the story idea. What if artificial intelligence really does become vastly more intelligent than we think? And so in 2017, when I was at the Hugos in Kansas City, I went to a panel on artificial intelligence, and really smart people. I don't claim to be as smart as these people, but they were talking about what it means for something to be intelligent. And the example one of the panelists used was, you measure, you can tell something's intelligent when it demonstrates the ability to predict behavior and then deceive based on that behavior. So you can tell a monkey is intelligent because when a bigger monkey comes in the cage, it hides the banana. Okay, so that was his premise. And he said, so what we need to do with these incredibly powerful, smarter than we are AIs is we need to teach them to lie to us. And I was like, danger, Will Robinson, danger. I've read science fiction.
No, we don't. No teaching it to lie. Bad idea.
But it was said, I think, seriously. And it made me think, yeah, probably any idea that's really bad, someone will try. And what would this look like? And of course, to me, that's the launch point of a story then, because, okay, now they're lying to us. They're hardwired to our brains. And what does that mean in the future, projecting it out, in terms of like conflict in a military, in military sci-fi, you need conflict. You need clashing civilizations or governments or armies or something. And so what are they going to clash over? And they're going to clash over this thing of how much autonomy do we have? How much access do we give the AIs? Because if they're that smart, and they'll be able to predict our behavior and they'll be able to deceive us. So then I started really getting fascinated with how would they deceive us? What kinds of deception would they use? And honestly, I've never served in the military, and I've wanted to write military science fiction for a long time, but I've always felt that I couldn't do it honestly because there's just too much about, I assume, military life that I would get wrong. And I don't mean like ranks and, gun type things. I mean, I mean, like Star Wars. Sorry if I'm going to offend people, but some of the officers that they have as officers, I just think I would never follow that person. I don't believe that I don't believe that there's any military like cell in their body, you know. And I did not want to produce something like that. However, I landed on, well, I do know something about journalism. What if my story were about a journalist who is impersonating an officer with the help of an artificial intelligence? That's a story I could tell authentically, because in order to do it, I'd have to impersonate someone, right? I'd have to be pretending, and maybe military people would say, oh, this person's impersonating someone. They're getting some things wrong. It could be the excuse I needed for the voice.
That is a very different perspective. I like it.
Is this out in audiobook? Because now I'm going to have to go listen to it.
It is not yet out in audiobook. I don't know if it will or not. It's the publisher has not told me.
Jared's just going to have to find somebody to read it to him at night.
I think you just volunteered. All right. So
no, I sleep.
before we dig into the story itself, deeper than you already have, I want to share this picture of the cover for you. And can you tell us the story of how you got this art? Because it's definitely catches your attention.
Yeah, I love the cover. I don't always love the cover of books, but that one, that was Kirk DePonce is a fantastic book designer, Dog Ear Design. Enclave, the publisher, hired Kirk. I know him. I've known him for a few years, but I was thrilled when I found out they were hiring Kirk to do it. And fortunately, the publisher asked me, you know, is there what kinds of things could you see on the cover? And that particular image, although I mean the spaceship wasn't there, obviously. When I was a young man in 1990, I went with a friend to the Achille Triangle in the mountain jungles of Guatemala. And I know it's it's so strange, because Operation Grendel does have a kind of journey to it. And in some ways it's based on the setting that I experienced in going to this really remote place. We flew in a Piper Cub, landed literally on a gravel strip that went straight up the side of a mountain. I couldn't believe it when we flew there. I was like, we're landing there. And he's like, yeah, you land going up and you take off going down. And that was a coffee plantation that was almost 12 miles from Chell, which was the village we were going to. And we had the afternoon to get there in the mountains. And I was in much better shape than I'm in now, but I remember thinking we're not going to make it. And it was because it was 1990. I know this is a little bit of a diversion, but Guatemala had just undergone this communist, like the communist insurgents were in the jungle, and they told Kevin, and I was with, told me, if we don't get there before sunset, we're sleeping in the jungle because there are communist guerrillas out here and they shoot down into the village. And if you're not inside, the militia for the village will not let you in. You have to be there before sundown. So I'm gonna tell a little aspect of this story, totally unrelated to the cover. I've never told this story before, but when we were walking, we were probably 7 miles. We were tired, you know. You're walking up and down; it's exhausting, you know. And we stopped to take a little break, and we hear this, like, I don't know how to make the noise, but like this padding, like this strange noise coming through. Like, is it a puma? What is it? You know, something's coming towards us. And it's just dark jungle leaves and things, and it splits, and there's this like 80-year-old woman, and she's dressed, she's like a descendant, this Mayan look, you know. She was an Achille Indian is what she was, and she was probably 40 years old, but the rough living had aged her. She had a baby on a sling in front of her and a baby on a sling in back of her, and she had a full 5-gallon bucket balanced on her head, and she was barefoot. And she went past us on the trail, stopped, looked at us, and started laughing. Like, she's barefoot, she's carrying 2 kids and a 5-gallon bucket of water on her head, and she's out pacing us. This is I'm like 20 something, you know. anyway, we made it in time, and there were a lot of things along the way, including what is actually in this jungle, and are we going to make it in time, that are just really vivid memories for me that I pulled from in trying to get across just some of the, I guess, ambiance of the journey of the story. So I sent photos. I went looking through my storage bins, and I found some of my photos taken on a disposable camera, and I scanned them and sent them to Kirk, and I said, "Hey, what about this?" And that's the image that he came up with.
Nice. So is the name Operation Grendel anyway tied to the Beowulf Grendel?
It's not exactly. Grendel in the book is it's a reference to the Grand Alliance. So it's the sort of good side. The colonial Marines call them Grendels because Grand Alliance, Grendel. It's a way of kind of villainizing the enemy. But I did take a little bit of the structure from, I read Beowulf, I think 3 times before writing this, and went through and looked at the structure of the story and thought I can use some of the structural elements of Beowulf just as a way, as markers, I guess, for the journey.
Nice.
So if you were to do a 30-second elevator pitch for this book, what would it be?
Oh, 30 seconds is always hard. Okay, so Operation Grendel is about a very cynical military journalist who impersonates an intelligence officer in order to write the story of a galactic invasion. It's basically an exploration of the ways in which artificial intelligence could be used to manipulate us in the future, the ways AIs might create personalized, direct-to-consumer, targeted, individualized propaganda. Was that under 30 seconds?
It was a very good under 30 seconds too. So what is it that makes your novel special out of all of the things in science fiction?
I'm always reluctant to say that anything about that I do is special. The idea of the book is that the story itself is a psyop the reader is participating in, but not in the way they think. So my goal, first of all, was to tell a compelling and entertaining story, because I don't think anything else works. If you miss that part, nothing else works, right? Grendel or Beowulf works because Grendel isn't, an awesome monster, right? And you get arms ripped out of their sockets and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to tell a compelling story, but I also I hope that maybe something about the story will lead readers to a place where they can see that the most powerful lies are generally the ones we aren't looking for. That's one of the things that astounded me when I was studying yellow journalism, was in so many cases, the deception was slipped in somewhere where you just weren't looking for it. And it honestly made me feel kind of vulnerable. And that's a creepy feeling, which is a good story premise, right? If you can, not that you always want to creep people out, but if people aren't sure what to expect, that creates curiosity. And then you wonder, where are we going? Oh my gosh, could something about this be true? And I don't know if it's true, but I think the best science fiction does point to possibilities. In fact, there's a great, I love the novel, The Space Merchants, which probably influenced me in some ways, because it's a little bit about commercial propaganda. And this is nothing like that, but it does have those kind of like weird moments where the writers will say something and you'll go, I wonder if I've bought that particular commercial propaganda lie as well. So that's what I was trying to do.
That is very cool. Sorry, it's been a long day.
19.
19, thank you. So which tropes is it that you think you hit on particularly awesome in Grendel?
Well, one of them was probably accidental. Publishers Weekly did a review where they pointed out that the story is actually an inversion of the embedded reporter following the action, because in Operation Grendel, the protagonist, Raymond Dahl, is a military journalist who becomes the story and is followed by a team of soldiers. So I would love to take credit for that, but I wasn't actually planning it. It just happened. And I'm glad they noticed it, because I went, that is what I did, isn't it? Also, there's a journey trope that's pretty tried and true, and that mirrors in a way the journey I took in Guatemala. So those are probably the main ones. There's it's also got a little bit of a noir feel to it. So there's the jaded person who's trying to tell the truth, but he's also kind of an unreliable narrator. So that unreliable narrator is probably not a trope, but it's definitely part of the story.
Okay, now we talked earlier about this being a military science fiction story, but what other genre or subgenres do you think Operation Grendel fits best into?
That's a great question. I probably techno thriller. We went over this. I tried to go over this with the publisher. What other categories does it fit in? And that's what we landed on, was military sci-fi, techno thriller, and just straight sci-fi. So I don't have a better answer than that. Sorry.
That's a good answer. So let's talk about the story itself now. Could you tell us a little bit about your main character and what makes him or her unique in the crowded field of science fiction?
Yeah. So Raymond Dahl is Corporal, and he's a clickbait journalist, basically, who thinks that he's trying to tell the truth and kind of get things past his editor at the Orbsen Military News Network. But he seems to be surrendering to this enemy worm, WYRM, it's an AI that has hacked the comms bracelet that he's wearing. And that AI has taken on the identity of his girlfriend. So he's an unreliable narrator, but I really wanted his unreliability to be sympathetic. Raymond Dahl is not crazy, and he's not going crazy, but his psyche is being assaulted by an extremely clever artificial mind. And the only thing he has going for him is the story that he's telling as the book unfolds.
Okay.
So
I like that.
I mean, I can talk for a long time about my book. I just don't want to. I mean, I don't want to railroad this thing.
No, and we don't want to do any spoilers. Obviously, we want them to read it and get the joy out of it themselves. So, were there any secondary characters that were especially memorable for you? And could you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, well, his girlfriend, I got increasingly fascinated with his girlfriend, because she's a real character in the story. There's a kind of very early on, there's like a sort of like a breakup scene. But yet he still cares about her. And then there's the AI that's like impersonating her. So we're seeing glimpses, but we don't know what part's true and what isn't. And I felt like even through that process, the backstory writing, the pre-writing, that I got to know her in a way that made me really admire her as a person. She's like a sort of like an analyst at an intelligence bureau, but she's low level. Nobody really pays out much attention to her, but she has these theories about the Grendels and what their weaknesses might be that Raymond discovers might actually be helpful to him. And then there's his editor at Orbsen, Major Weston, who is a bit of a hard-boiled editor, probably, who is well-versed in journalism and is basically teaching him how to tell the sorts of stories that people will read, that will have enough truth in them, but not too much truth. We don't want to compromise the war effort, that kind of thing. And then there's the team that's tasked with keeping him alive. And one of them, my favorite character in that group of special forces people, is Laclos, which is the combat medic, and person who is unexpectedly cheerful much of the time. And I got to really liking her, wanting her to influence him. I wanted her to be able to pull him back some. So I can't tell you whether she does or not. You'll have to read the book.
All right, that's a good answer.
As I'm sure JR would say, as an infantryman, he's biased towards liking medics, and that explains why I'm still here. Is there anything you can tell us about the bad guys? Because obviously there's a bad guy, without any spoilers.
Yeah, well, the bad guys are the the worms, the artificial intelligence, the Grendels themselves are also, yeah, without giving spoilers, I mean, it's the manipulation, right? And I don't want to give away how they're doing it because it's a big part of the resolution of the book. But because the worm on his comms bracelet realizes that his weakness is Ivy, the question is Ivy really his love interest or his enemy? As he's going deeper and deeper towards this peace treaty that he's supposed to be working out with with an ambassador from the Grand Alliance. Is he being lured there to give away stuff, or is he being sent there to negotiate a much needed respite? And seemingly the person that he's most in love with is also the person that is trying to unravel his mind, I guess.
That's deep.
So I'm going to avoid the evil girlfriend trope jokes.
Yeah.
If your characters met you in a back alley, and knowing who you are, how would they feel, or how would you survive that?
I probably wouldn't survive. Any of these characters could kill me. I mean, except Raymond Dahl probably. He's a military journalist, but even he probably could. I'm getting older. But he wouldn't. He would probably write a story about me that would have just enough truth in it that it would hurt, but it would be pretty malicious, probably. It would be extremely unflattering and sort of also true, I guess. But the other ones, I don't know if they would. Some of them would probably, know what I was trying to do, I guess. I did. This isn't a direct answer to the question. I had a military journalist write me a letter that I got like a week ago after he read Operation Grendel. And it was really meaningful to me because he said, thank you for telling the truth about this. And I haven't gotten a lot of feedback from military people. And I've been wondering, did I step on toes? Did I, did I botch something here that was just out in my ignorance, but coming from someone who is actually Raymond Dahl's job, it was a cool letter.
Now the question is, could Robin Williams play this character when they did Good Morning Operation Grendel?
That is a great question. I don't think so. No. This isn't really a really laugh a minute sort of novel.
Okay. All right, Doc, you get to ask the important, the fun question next. 25. And you got to unmute yourself.
Oh, JR wants me to ask about the sausage. So that just sounded really bad.
Keep power through it. Power through it.
Yeah, power through it.
Okay. Sometimes when people write books, there's cool scenes or ideas that get cut from the final book. So in the making of the sausage of the book, what was anything left on the cutting room floor?
Yes and no. That's a really interesting question because Operation Grendel, I wrote, well, I don't want to give you all the making of it because it would be boring, but one really interesting thing that happened was after I'd written the fourth draft, I wrote it fairly quickly and I revised it fairly quickly. And I had an agent who really liked it, but she didn't think she could necessarily sell it where she thought it should be sold. So she sent it to Russell Galen. And I've never met Russell Galen. I don't know why he would pay attention to me or my manuscript, but he read, draft 4 of Operation Grendel, and he sent it to me with a letter that said, I see the attraction. I think this can sell. However, it's too clever without a human connection to the characters. And just blunt, but that's what I wanted. And like, really, at some point you realize it's not about you, it's about the manuscript, right? Does the manuscript work or not? And I realized that I had left out of the manuscript all of the pre-writing, the character work. I was so concentrating on all the thematic stuff that I had not given enough of the characters. So I went back and I rewrote the entire manuscript added 25,000 words, which honestly, it still is only it's 75,000 or something like that, 73,000 something. And I told the whole story, and I put back in the things that I knew that I was pulling from that I'd done in my pre-writing. And when that happened, I knew that was the story I was trying to tell. And it actually sold very quickly when that version sold quickly.
Okay. That's always interesting to hear the behind the scenes stories. So finally, what can you tell us about the universe where this is happening? In miniseries, the worlds where the story is told is as much a character as the protagonist or antagonist. So can you give us a hint of what we can expect from this expansive world you've created?
Yeah, I think I've probably already mentioned the defining characteristic thing of it. I mean, in Operation Grendel, it's set on a kind of jungle world. There's two cultures in conflict, and one of them is just completely has, they have no firewalls keeping, their AIs from telling them the stories that they want to hear. And the other one is much more realistic. But the problem is, with a lot of technology, the early adopters get the advantage, right? So you may love autonomy, but it makes it harder to get things done when you're not all. I mean, the Grendels aren't a hive mind, but because they don't have as many limitations, they are harder to beat. So the side that's more, about freedom or whatever is losing. Because they're not adopting the technology, because to do so would be to surrender their humanity. And that's kind of the theme of the whole thing is, who do we become when we let this take over?
Okay, so you've talked about a lot about the story, and you've definitely sold me. So I'm going to have to go and find someone to read it to me. Maybe I can write it in Crown so I can get it a little better. Pretend I'm a Marine or something. But is Operation Grendel a part of a series? Is their story done? Will there be more from these characters? Where do you see this going? What's next?
Well, it was written as a standalone, but I have told the public, I've actually outlined another standalone novel in this universe that is tentatively called Operation Defect, and the idea is that it's an assassination attempt from a Grendel perspective, seeing what the world looks like when you are completely wired to these AIs. It right now it's still in that simmering stage. I have to sit on stories usually for like a year before I really like know what I'm doing. I'm not like they're Kevin Anderson, he writes a lot, and I'm not prolific that way. I have to really know what it is I'm grappling with. So we'll see. I'm hoping that I have that I can start writing that maybe by the end of the year.
Okay.
So in every universe, there's technology, particularly in science fiction ones. But is there any technology you particularly fell in love with that you created and that you'd want to keep?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily all that original to me. The Grendel frigate that launches the attack on the United Colonial Marine Corps base and embeds this worm in the comms bracelet. I would love to have a Grendel frigate. If I could be in control of it, I would. Yeah, that would be fantastic. It's too much power for me or anybody. Probably I shouldn't be given that sort of toy. But if you gave it to me, would I take it? Yes, I would take it. I would definitely take it.
So what other kind of tech is there? Was it rail guns? Was it chemical propellants, lasers?
Yeah, magnetic rail. Actually, like probably not very realistic, but yes, rifles that shoot magnetic grenades, magnetic rounds. There is combat in this story. There's also flash rifles, which are I came up with the idea because I was thinking about what having an embedded AI would be able to do for you as a soldier. And one of the things it would be able to do, if it has that full access to all of your senses and can heighten your senses with its own sensors, without you having to put on special equipment, it might actually make you susceptible to things. So the United Colonies developed something called a flash rifle that is outdated by the time the book opens, but it uses basically strobe lights to to partially blind Grendel soldiers when they're doing operations. They're normal. I mean, they're human beings, but if your senses have been heightened, you're more susceptible to things like powerful lights in your eyes or whatever. And it's just any little advantage they can find, any kind of low tech thing, is something you would grab hold of, I think.
So for your space travel, was it FTL or did you use jump gates?
There's no actual mentioned. It's jump gate technology, but it's not mentioned in the story really, other than the Grendel fleet appearing over this world kind of unexpectedly when they're supposed to be doing peace talks, and here they come.
Nice.
So, do you have aliens in this universe?
No, you're supposed to ask him if he had the bad tech, how would he abuse it? Because he was trying to be all nice and stuff.
Oh,
We got to get a little bit into his dark side.
but he's such a sweet, nice guy.
Oh, well, yeah, no.
How would you abuse your tech?
If I had a Grendel frigate, I would probably launch the worms at many of the world's governments, if not all of them, and try to find out things like, where is Jimmy Hoffa's secret diary buried, stuff like that. I want to know, like the secrets. I shouldn't, but I do. So I would probably, maybe find a way to get some of that, cool stuff in Area 51 transferred to my basement. I don't know. I just see what's there. What could I pull up on the Grendel frigate screens? What do we have?
Fair.
Now you can talk aliens. You have my permission.
Why, thank you, your weirdness. So are there aliens in this universe?
There are not aliens. There is one fantastical creature.
Ooh.
And it makes an appearance in the book. It was and it's based on, I do a lot of things based on mythology. Obviously, reading Beowulf and stuff. There's a creature called the Ishnashi, which is a Central South American mythological thing that's kind of a combination between a lizard and a bear. And it has a second mouth in its chest. It's really creepy. It's like the thing that goes bump in the night for, Central and South American, like Ishiel Indians, for instance. Again, calling back to this thing. And my thinking was the Grendels are going to have this rite of passage for kind of sorting you into what are you good at? How can we use you? And one of them is facing your darkest fear, facing the Ishnashi one-on-one in a place where you don't have, you're not able to rely on anything except, whatever technology you have, like your rifle, a knife or something, and you're facing the dark thing at the center of your soul, because they're quite aware of what's at the center of your soul, and sometimes they've put it there, and so they've made these biological fabrications to try to play on our worst nightmares and manipulate us, sort out the great soldiers from the not so great ones.
That sounds like a hell of a graduation from basic training.
Yeah, that's one reason why they're winning, I guess.
Okay. So how did you create those? If you were going to add more aliens or more creatures other than drawing from mythology, would you let biology inspire you, or are you going to just make something up completely new?
Yeah, I never know where my creative well like pulls from. I mean, honestly, I feel like I need something and I invent it, but I'm never comfortable with just saying, okay, it's going to look like a monkey. And I know writers do that all the time, but for me, it doesn't work. There has to be I always feel like I need to have a deeper connection to the thing. What is it that makes me think this creature would be cool? And so when I was just, I was trying to do some background research of the area, and I came across the Ishnashi, and I was like, that is really creepy. How can I use it? And that's really how it ended up in the book. Was it felt like something the Grendels would take advantage of. So I don't right now, I don't see this universe having aliens in it. It's mostly human beings at war with themselves.
Well, we can be nasty enough to ourselves.
Yeah.
So would you consider the AI enhanced Grendel soldiers to be transhuman almost?
Yes. Yeah, I would. But they're not to the point where they're not like cybernetic where they have enhancements. They have enhanced weapons and things, but it's mostly a mind thing. Those sorts of enhancements would be really expensive, I think. In my universe, I think they're connecting people to an AI. I don't know if you guys have heard of Neuralink. It's super creepy.
have.
I wrote the book before I heard anything from Neuralink, and I find it really fascinating that Elon Musk is actually, working on planting like 1,000 microfibers in human brains and connecting them to smartphones, and then ultimately to a supercomputer.
Nope.
It's
Pass,
not for me.
negative. Go back to getting us to Mars, dude. Go back to what you're good at.
But it's a great, fascinating science fiction premise, right? It is. It's just
but
creepy.
I've read enough science fiction that I know I don't want it happening to my head.
Right. Me too. Yeah.
All right. So clearly this interview is winding down, but before we wrap this up, was there anything about Operation Grendel that we didn't ask you that you wanted to tell us before we moved on?
That's a great question. I should have an answer for that, but I honestly don't have an answer for that. No, I mean, I think we've covered everything. We probably went longer than we were planning on going.
Nope. Right on time.
Say,
so
yes,
by
Operation Grendel. That's what I should say. That we haven't talked about that enough.
And one good place you could buy it would be that Storybundle we hinted at earlier.
That's right.
It's almost like that's going to be linked in the show notes where you can get, I think there's at least 12 that I counted, military sci-fi books that you can get, I think, for about $15.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point.
That's a good deal for you, dear listener. You can save a little bit of money, support authors, and I think sometimes they even Storybundle will support charities. We've tried to reach out for someone from the actual organization that hosts these because they do I bought a lot of books from them, but they just some scheduling conflicts. But we are going to work on that because it's a fun concept of a way to support authors more directly and get a bunch of good books at a good price.
And a bunch of people that you like. I've discovered a lot of good authors that I've enjoyed out of story bundles.
Yeah. So
and I give them to my mother.
Nice. Do you find them to be pretty user friendly as a website?
Me? Yes.
Yes.
I find them to be very user friendly as a website.
Okay.
Yeah, me too. I like it a lot. Yeah.
All right. So we'll link all that in the show notes. And then after you buy the story bundle and you say, you know what, I really like this Daniel Schwabauer guy, and I want to read everything else that he wrote, we're going to ask you this question so they can do that. How can listeners or readers find you on the wild, wild interwebs?
Well, my website's a great place to do it. It's danschwabauer.com. It's SCHWABAUER.com. I'm also on Facebook, facebook.com/Schwabauer. And those are probably the two best places. I don't really do Twitter.
Yep, I barely go there too, so I feel you. And all of those, dear listener, as usual, will be at the bottom of the show notes, so you can check it out. You can find us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters tech and tech blades, anchor.fm/blasters tech and tech blades. You can follow us on the aforementioned Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com, and sometimes Cisca will even send you snarky replies. Again, that's blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on the Facebooks at facebook.com/blastersandbladespodcast, where we host all of our shenanigans, and we generally goof off and are totally irrelevant. But, we do it seriously when we're irreverent, so it's all good. You can support the show over on anchor.fm, Blasters Tech and Tech Blades, where you can support like a monthly pledge, or you could do a one-time thing at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comments that it is for the
Energy
podcast.
drink.
Yes, because she needs a drink, apparently. All right, Doc, are you ready to bring this puppy home?
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. For the overworked Nick Garber, the pizza loving JR Handley. He really likes pineapple on it. I am Cisca. This was the Blasters and Blade podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, same place, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, things that go boom, and serving JR pineapple.
You're
'Cause
going
he
to
loves
hell
it
for
on
that.
his
You know
pizza.
that's right. There's a
What?
special place. There's a special place in the dark corner of the underworld for you.
You know what? It's all okay.